The ending of Sinners, the intense vampire thriller set in 1930s Mississippi, left many viewers with tears in their eyes and questions in their heads, especially about Smoke's final vision. Directed by Ryan Coogler and starring Michael B. Jordan as Smoke, the film builds up to a heartbreaking, emotional climax. After everything Smoke and his twin brother Stack had gone through, starting a juke joint, fighting off a vampire invasion, and surviving a violent Ku Klux Klan attack, Smoke's death scene and what he saw in those final moments became a major talking point among fans. Now, Ryan Coogler has cleared things up in an interview with USA Today, and his explanation adds so much more depth to the film's ending. According to Coogler, Sinners is really a story about identity. Who we are, who we think we are, and who we want to be. For Smoke, his journey wasn't just about running a juke joint or battling supernatural forces. It was about facing his past and accepting what he had become. And most importantly, it was about finally finding peace after carrying so much guilt. Smoke always saw himself as a soldier, someone trained to kill and handle violence. Coogler explained that Smoke believed he was unredeemable because of what he'd done in the past. He saw himself as a killer, not just because of the life he lived, but because of what that role meant to him. It wasn't just about being tough or brave. It was about being broken. He thought that the blood on his hands, metaphorically and literally, was too much to ever be washed off. Even though he had lost Annie and their child, he still saw himself as a father. That vision in his final moments, seeing Annie and their child again, was not just a dream, it was his redemption. It was the only ending that made sense for someone like Smoke, according to Coogler. Throughout the movie, we get glimpses of who Smoke used to be and who he wanted to become. On the day of the juke joint's grand opening, while Stack went off to hustle and round up their crew, Smoke did something much more personal. He went back home to visit the grave of his child and to see Annie, showing that deep down, family still meant everything to him. That's a big clue into Smoke's character. Despite everything going on, the vampires, the KKK, the chaos, he was still just a man mourning his family. The flashbacks sprinkled throughout the film also showed us that Smoke wasn't just another gangster. He was dealing with regret, guilt, and deep emotional scars. Those scenes made it clear that even though he was good at fighting and killing, it was never who he truly wanted to be. For Stack, the bar, the money, and the schemes were a way of life. But for Smoke, it was always about something else, maybe a second chance, maybe a distraction from his pain, or maybe just trying to support his brother. Either way, it didn't reflect who he was inside. So when Smoke dies at the end of Sinners, seeing Annie and their child was a moment of peace, not just for him, but for us watching. Coogler said that Smoke being reunited with them was the only ending that felt right. And it makes sense. Throughout the movie, we see him struggling to forgive himself. That final vision was like him finally getting the forgiveness he needed, not from anyone else, but from himself. What's even more interesting is how different Smoke and Stack ended up being, despite being twins. Stack was always the smooth talker, the hustler, the one who could charm anyone into anything. Smoke, on the other hand, was the action guy, the fighter, the quiet one, the protector. But when it came down to the end, it was Stack who made a deal to stay alive as a vampire, while Smoke accepted death. The mid-credits scene confirmed that Stack was still around in the 90s, living his best undead life with Mary. Meanwhile, Smoke was gone, his journey completed in a very different way. This difference between the brothers was not just about personality. It was about purpose. Stack moved on and adapted to the supernatural twist life threw at him. He survived. Smoke chose to go down with honor, to protect what little good he had left in him. That's what separates the two. For Stack, the juke joint's bloody opening night was a beginning. For Smoke, it was the end. It's also worth noting that Smoke's death wasn't just thrown in for shock value. Coogler confirmed that from the start, Smoke was always going to die. The story was built around that truth. The supernatural elements, the history, the racism, the personal loss, it all built up to that moment. It was a culmination of everything Smoke had lived through, and everything he believed about himself. His reunion with Annie and the child wasn't a happily ever after, in the traditional sense, but it was a spiritual one. It was a moment of release, and it left viewers emotional for good reason. One of the most powerful takeaways from the movie is that redemption doesn't always come in the form of survival. For Smoke, redemption came through sacrifice. He didn't get to walk away into the sunset or start a new life. But he did get closure. That's something not every character gets, especially in stories that deal with horror and trauma. Smoke's arc was about moving on, not just from life, but from guilt. And it felt like the most honest ending the character could have had. If you were hoping for a sequel to Sinners, Coogler also hinted that it's probably not happening. The story was meant to be satisfying and complete. And judging by how the film ends, he definitely succeeded in telling a full story. The ending wasn't just about killing the vampire or surviving the KKK. It was about Smoke finally finding peace after a life full of violence and loss. As much as we may have wanted Smoke to live, the ending was necessary. It showed us who he really was under all the blood and tough exterior. That's why the vision made so much sense. It wasn't random or dreamlike. It was Smoke finally seeing what he always hoped to return to: his family, his peace, his soul. In a way, the entire movie leads up to that one scene. It's not about who lived or died in the end. It's about who they really were when everything was stripped away. Smoke's ending is one of those rare moments in horror thrillers where the supernatural is used not to scare, but to heal. And that's what made it so unforgettable.